Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this session, taking a look at UMOM, the Urban Mobility Assessment Model. UMOM is a joint collaboration between the EIT and leading European research organizations and companies. UMOM enables city leaders to make more informed mobility-linked decisions based upon their city's actual data. UMOM was funded within the EIT program Future Mobility Factory, and this is one of the first tools they're launching within the Factory Toolbox. Today, 14 cities are participating in the Baseline Assessment 2020, which is considered to be the first pilot from UMOM. And with us here in the studio, we have 6 UMOM participants representing key project partners. I would like to briefly introduce them to you. Firstly, we have Philipp Schmitz, the Business Development Manager from the EIT Future Mobility Factory and coordinator of the UMOM project. Kuba Muscat, Research Associate, University College London, Maslov. He has led the development of the analysis for the city's mobility systems. Jana Helder, Solutions Developer, Bable Smart Cities. She has contributed on the social and environmental dimensions, tool technicalities, and Bable hosts the online tool and supports the data collection and automated reporting. Aguado from Carnet, the Cooperative Automotive Research Network, created the first module of the model policy and innovation. David Fernández, Innovation Manager from CTAG, the Automotive Technology Center of Galicia. CTAG has been working specifically on the criteria and mechanism to evaluate the data management aspects of cities. Raul Bono, also from CTAG, is a project manager within their innovation division. So first, we'll be hearing directly from Philipp, who will introduce the UMOM model to you, and second from Kuba, who will define the methodology and highlight some of the results based on city archetypes. The other project partners will join us for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please do use the live Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Over to you, Philipp.
Dear Elaine, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. I'm very proud to be here today as project coordinator from the EIT Mobility side and to open this presentation on behalf of the project team, which has done an amazing job over the last month of the implementation. A big thank you also to the cities which have been involved in the first pilot this year, and despite all challenges due to COVID, still found the time to participate in this initiative. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Shed light into your urban mobility system. That's the slogan which describes best the ambition of this initiative. Because we all know that with more and more accurate information available, the picture becomes more clear and we can actually see better, estimate better in which areas we need to improve and in which areas we're already good. In the end, with more information processed in a meaningful way, we can take better decisions towards the overarching objective and the reason why we're all here today, to create more sustainable urban mobility and high quality of life in cities. That's what we want to facilitate with UMOM, the Urban Mobility Assessment Model, and that's why we have supported this development within the factory program of EIT Urban Mobility. Next slide. Why another indicator system? That's a question which we hear when we speak about the UMOM. Of course, we don't expect that this is the absolute answer or the indicator system with the only right answer, no, but it's one answer. We live in a complex world, and if we create a model, we always make assumptions and compromises to reduce this complexity. And this creates actually the possibility of more than one good answer. But of course, we are not reinventing the wheel. We are building here on the experience and practices of our partners, mainly the University College of London with its Mass Maturity Index and the Fraunhofer Future City Index. This way, we created something what is actually complementary to other approaches, as for example, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Indicators. With the UMOM, we have focused very much on the application. Just 2 key characteristics. It's easy to use and it delivers quick results. Therefore, the UMAM is designed as a self-assessment tool, which is accessible online and able to give a very fast response on the question, how mature is my city actually with regards to urban mobility, and what are its strengths and weaknesses according to good scientific and empirical analysis. But the model does not only include analysis. It goes a step further and it suggests best practices from our database, how the performance in individual dimensions can be improved. So we are not doing a ranking on best cities in Europe or in the world and manifesting everything in one answer in one single indicator. That's not our objective. In our understanding, that's actually hardly possible. We're rather looking on the individual city, on the local context, making use of open data, shed light into the system, or at least we are looking from a different perspective to come to new insights and an idea how to implement new solutions in line with our vision, sustainable urban mobility. Next slide, please. We're following a long-term approach here. Therefore, we have anchored the data collection via UMAM for our strategical impact indicators in the strategic agenda of EIT Urban Mobility. With UMAM, we have developed a tool for our cities to engage and steer urban mobility innovation. With the collected data, we will be able to see what is happening on the ground, and we will be able to monitor our societal impact in the long term. Next slide, please. Here we can see an overview of the developing partners, mostly research-driven and true experts when it comes to urban mobility innovation. The University College London with its Mobility as a Service lab, Bable Smartcities, which is a Fraunhofer spin-off and involved in the Future City Index initiative, Carnet as research hub from Barcelona, driven by CEAT, the Technical University of Barcelona, and the City of Barcelona, and CTAG, the Center of Automotive Technology of Galicia in Spain. And then I want to thank again the 14 cities having participated in the first baseline assessment this year. These cities are Amsterdam, Helsinki, Hamburg, Eindhoven, Helmond, Warsaw, Stockholm, Istanbul, Stuttgart, Milan, and Barcelona with its city, metropolitan area, and two suburban municipalities, Sant Cugat and Rubi, which allows us actually to create very interesting synergies between the different scales of urban mobility. Next slide, please. So what are actually the steps of the UMAM and which results can users expect? I think one day was the record in the whole data collection and submission via the online tool by one city during the pilot. But of course, this depends on how the current capacity level and how accessible the databases are in the individual cities. But most of the data is actually openly accessible and which can be found on the internet as well. After the data submission in its final stage, the online tool will be able to produce a quick scoring report, which can be received within 1 week. And within 3 weeks, a full roadmap report is developed by our experts, including best practices on how to improve on the individual indicators. Now I hand over to the project lead, Kuba, from the University College of London to tell us more about the methodology and insights from the first baseline assessment this year.
Thanks, Philip. That was a really good introduction to the tool as a whole. And I'll now take you through a few more of the sort of detailed elements of the index itself and some of the process that we went through within the project. Could I have the next slide, please? So here you can see an outtake from the interface for the data collection process that is hosted on the Bable website currently. You can log into this website, register yourself, the city, or whoever is inputting the data for that city, and then provide the data through this tool that we have for the UMAM. Within it, you can see 6 dimensions and the background for the city information with a couple of key details that also help us better analyze and match the city within the tool itself. Could you go to the next slide, please? As you could see, there were 6 main categories here. This These all together allow us to provide more detailed insights into how a city is performing as a whole, considering all of the different elements, so a fully holistic approach. Going through these one by one, we have first we have the policy and innovation section, where we consider passenger and freight planning maturity within the cities, as well as the interventions that are testing new mobility services and seeing the scale of innovation within cities. Then we look at the transport supply, assessing the availability of modes, the service reliability and the strength of all of the different services within the city, and how accessible they are to different people living across the wide range potentially of the city. Then we also consider the travel demand, assessing the modal split and the traffic flow within the cities. Before moving on to the data governance side, here we look at different types of data, how they are collected by the city and how they may be used, and seeing where these can integrate with the other sections of the tool. So especially how that could integrate with the policy and innovation side. Then we also consider the environmental aspect. So how does transport within a city affect the local environment, be it from energy emissions to air quality or noise emissions? Finally, we then look at the social aspects of transport, namely looking at the cost, the safety, and the accessibility of the different modes and how people are affected on a more social level from those. With each of these, there are a number of indicators that we have determined on the basis of our own experience, as well as other indicators that are available on the market. And finally, through discussion with cities, making this an iterative process throughout the development of the tool to make sure that we really are targeting the most important things within the city, and that cities are the core of that process. So they've been able to help us with that. Could you go to the next slide, please? Here you can see the scoring mechanisms and the roadmaps. So within each of these, as I mentioned, we had the detailed indicators that really allow us to provide this full picture for each of those, and then for the whole city to understand the general mobility. We produced an automated scoring system, which allows us to very quickly assess the tool, to assess the city's mobility performance. And as Philipp said, this allows a sort of self-assessment format where cities are able to input the data and then quickly receive an answer or an assessment for it. Through this iterative process, through testing with cities, and then as well as consulting with experts in the field to make sure that the weightings and the scores are appropriately assigned, we looked at some of the benchmark scores and are able to then determine where there is room for improvement potentially in certain cities. This then led on to the development of roadmaps within the project, where we were able to look at a few actions which would help improve those scores if this were done if this assessment is completed on an annual basis or even longer term, depending on some of the interventions. So we assigned an avoid, shift, improve approach to the different interventions that could take place within the city and how they would affect each of the different indicators and dimensions that we were providing. So therefore providing a very targeted feedback system within the approach. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Here we have a couple of high-level insights into some of the assessment results that we received from the baseline assessment in 2020 with our 14 cities. We determined, on the basis of some literature that we found from the IFMO in terms of city archetypes, 3 archetypes that roughly correspond to a few of the cities that we were analyzing: determined regulation, governed success, and car-driven. Within these sort of categories, based on the assessment, I'll provide you a couple of sort of pieces of feedback that seem to be common themes and common recommendations that could be taken forward by these types of cities. Naturally, there is a lot more detail in the specific city reports. However, we need to be careful in terms of how those are shared and how widely those are publicized, as those are sensitive documents that are between the EIT and the cities within the scope of this project. So within the determined regulation cities, these are cities which seem to have higher levels of public transport provision. We're trialing various innovative solutions from a top-down approach. However, this raised certain affordability concerns, which could then be addressed through actions there. Within the governed success, there were clear goals and plans stated within the policy side of the cities. However, other regulation and expansion of transport network, public transport networks could be beneficial to these cities. Then finally, in cities that were car-driven, we found a common theme that innovative PT infrastructure, rather than heavy investment, would be the most effective approach in terms of improving the sustainability and strength of the transport systems. These are just a couple of very high-level insights that we found without going into too much detail. And bearing in mind this is quite a short session, I'd like to now pass you back to Elaine, who will help moderate the Q&A session here with us, and then bring back the rest of the panel, the rest of the team that's been working on the project tirelessly through the past few months.
Excellent. Thank you, Kuba and Philip. We have a few minutes left for Q&A. I'd like to remind you, like Kuba, that we have a number of people here, kind of also in the virtual room to answer your questions. So I'd like to start with some questions really to the other members of the team. So Albert from Carnet, you worked closely on the policy and innovation dimension of the project. Could you give us some examples of the strengths and weaknesses that you were assessing in this dimension?
Yeah, thanks Elaine, and thanks other partner for your presentation. Our idea is to analyze the public mobility for people and strange in order to analyze how a big city is a reflex of the ecosystem system that is alive, and it's important that we analyze how it moves the person and the freight. So in that order, we can have an important picture of how it works. If not, it's just a part of mobility and not the whole picture. So that's why it's important to have a big dimension of analysis in our part of policy and innovation.
Okay, all right. Raul and David from CTAG. Once you receive the data from a city and the associated assessment results, in terms of the scoring, how are you then able to link these results to the recommendations and roadmaps that you then develop to give insight to the cities, the real practical insights to the cities?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Elaine. I think it's actually pretty relevant for human since, as it was mentioned before by Kuba and Philipp, in the presentation, we do not tend to state on the analytical side of things, but actually to provide real recommendations and practical measures that cities can implement. So that's actually one of the key things that we addressed when we were planning this part of providing the recommendations. So looking at the data that we get from the assessment, what we do there is to start the process of linking these indicators with real recommendations. So we started initially addressing those sections that received a lower score, which is normally under an average of 4. And from there, we just look at a pool of potential recommendations that, as Kuba mentioned, were categorized under the ASI approach. That for those of you which are not familiar to it means a holistic approach to transport sustainability design, and following 3 pillars, which is avoid, meaning that you improve the system's efficiency, shift or maintain, which is you improve the individual trip efficiency, and to improve, which is how you can actually make your vehicles or your operational efficiency bigger. So looking at this pool of solutions from these 3 categories, we then looked at other parameters like what is the time frame for the implementation and how much complexity will it involve for the cities, meaning that you would require to start a stakeholder process and so on. So also in this process, we try to, let's say, bring as much as additional insights from the actual cities, doing a kind of research on what is the status regarding the existing initiatives that they have. This can be what are the, let's say, main lines in their existing urban mobility plans, previous projects or initiatives that they did. So when we propose these measures, we try them to build as much as possible on what are the strengths on the cities, meaning that, for instance, they have a good public transport provision, a modal split which, let's say, is in favor of active modes of transport, like walking or cycling, that they have low emission zones defined, and so on. So yeah, let's say that we try to align these recommendations as much as possible with the reality of the city. So we kind of maintain a holistic approach with what's already in place in the city. And then, as it was mentioned by Kuba, then we compiled all these sort of recommendations into, let's say, a roadmap that can serve as an action plan for cities on how to actually steer the implementation of these improvements in urban mobility.
Okay. So the city will have a roadmap at the end with these recommendations, and that's as described. Good. Okay.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay. Moving on to Jana. I'm looking towards the kind of the next steps. So we're all kind of thinking, what are the plans in terms of improving UMAM, and what additional features do you expect to include in the 2021 developments?
Yes, thanks for the question. So currently, as David explained, this is mainly built on recommendations we compiled, but we are planning to get this also in a more data-driven way next year. And as the UMAM was not the only project within the EIT Urban Mobility Factory, but there were other approaches on how to support cities in scaling solutions. We are trying to compile or to combine two of our actions next year. And that is once the UMAM, and on the other hand, the best practice database. So this year we have been collecting best practices from the city club cities and also from other cities where we saw projects in Europe, which are leading on urban mobility. And next year we plan to link these projects to the performance of a city within UMAM. And then we might be able to link the different projects to performance and indicators and give recommendations on in the direction of cities who have been improving in this sector over the recent years, because UMAM is a tool which cities should use regularly, so that we could see the path where they go. And if we see that one city has been improving in one section, we would go more into detail. Did that link to the projects they did? And would there some projects also be feasible to recommend them to other cities? So basically we try to link projects which cities did to their performance in the UMAM and go more into the detail of what impact did the different projects have on the indicators, and therefore deepen the recommendations and base them more on data which we collect.
Okay, are you actually collecting additional data points, or are you just taking the data that you have and kind of going that next extra step?
Basically, we're just linking the database of reference projects of use cases which we have, which is currently around 350 use cases. We're trying to link that to the data points we are collecting currently already, just linking these two assets together.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and I've got one more. Now, Philip, if this is, I think, a really important question for all the cities out there that are online. If a city wants to participate with UMAM and receive the assessments and roadmaps, what do they need to do?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if you want to get in touch with us and engage in the UMAM process, we would be happy if you initiate the contact with us via email, factory@eitmobility.eu. You can send us a mail and we will provide you with further information how to access the tool and what are the steps on providing the information and to get to the online version. So, as already said before, this is actually a continuous exercise, or it's you can do the UMAM assessment at any moment. With our city club cities, we intend to do one assessment every year, but you can step in at any moment and start an assessment.
Okay, great. Now, I know you've kind of touched on this a bit in your presentation already, but questions kind of come from the audience that there are a lot of tools out there in urban mobility assessments, methodologies. Can you kind of summarize again, like really how UMAM is different and what you think, why you think cities really should come to you?
Yes, thank you. That's actually a very good question, and which I think is an important question because I tried to highlight this before, that we are living in a really complex world, and if we are creating a model to approximate the reality, then with creating a model, you're always making assumptions and compromises to reduce this complexity. complexity. And this way, you are also creating the room for many possible good answers, actually, so that there's not the one tool which gives you the absolute answer. It always depends on the local context, on the dynamic development of the environment, and also to your interpretation of the data. And that's what we're focusing or trying to implement as well within the UMAM, and giving you a tool for self-assessment with really good scientific practice and empirical background.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to go back to David too for a question. Now, David, you're kind of talking about some of the general recommendations that are coming out of the work, and then you kind of link them to additional parameters. Are you narrowing down the indicators? Could you kind of go back and tell us a bit more about how you do that?
Yeah, okay. So if I understand the question correctly, it means if we can provide a bit more of information about how we narrow down the different indicators.
Exactly. You said that you have some general recommendations, and then you use other things about the city to kind of find more specifically what's best for that city, or what could be best for that city.
Yeah, okay. So in this sense, obviously the first step is always to look at whether this city has or not defined already a sustainable urban mobility plan and its counterpart for freight. So this, in most of the cases, already provides a good overview on, let's say, what's the status on in terms of planning for urban mobility in this city. So in cases that, for instance, certain city has already defined within there what are their specific areas for target, meaning that they have, for instance, a plan already defined for shared mobility, a plan already defined for active mobility, and so on. We tend to practically encourage them to continue with this approach, whereas also planning on, let's say, new things that they can add on top of this. So looking at the interlink between these sections as individual parts of it, to kind of proposing a plan that, looks at the cross links between the different sections. So when you plan for active mobility, you also plan on how to actually enhance the safety in certain areas by introducing, let's say, for instance, measures for walking cities or green spaces. So it actually looks at, let's say, all the problems as kind of as a whole, instead of like just inducing changes in a certain area. So the sustainable urban mobility plan is normally what we look at it in the city. And as it was mentioned before by Albert and Jana, their participation in previous projects, we tend to compile what is, let's say, the overview of projects that they have been doing, so they can actually assess through this method what is the actual performance of the activities that they are implementing in cities.
Okay, good, thank you, appreciate it. So Mr. Kuba, how do you choose the indicators that you're looking at, and how do you make sure that the most important topics are covered?
So this is where it was quite important that we followed an iterative process in the development of the tool. We started off within the project with the indicators from ourselves, so UCL with the Mass Maturity Index, and then the Fraunhofer Institute's index as well. And then we combined those two to look at what are the key elements that those were already looking at, as well as what other indicators were considering. Then we developed an initial baseline for it with the indicators according to each of those dimensions, and then took those back to the cities to find out what were the most important factors to them, and then to see if anything was missing within those indicators, something else that they thought that needed to be added. So going through this process allowed us to really provide a comprehensive analysis system that does touch on all of those elements within the city mobility system. Then the second part of the question asking about the number of indicators, I think there was roughly 5 to 6 for each of the dimensions, but it varied a little bit depending on the dimension. Some of them were a little bit more complex than others to really enable that full analysis through it.
Okay, good. All right, well, appreciate it. Kuba, thank you for that. Do we have time for one more question? I think we're being told that we are out of time. So I'm going to have to kind of wrap up at this point. So I'm sorry if your question was not answered. I think there were one or two still outstanding, but really I want to take a moment now to just thank all the speakers for this presentation and for going into detail on the project. And I hope to see that more cities will join. And okay, I have another message back that actually any questions that were not answered, we will be responding to in written form. So thank you very much for those questions, everyone. It's appreciated. And please, best for the rest of your day, okay? Pleasure.